10 years. In the world of finance, a decade is a respectable holding period. It's long enough to weather market fluctuations, to see an investment mature, to build substantial equity. It's a testament to initial due diligence and a belief in long-term value. Samantha and I had held for 10 years. Our marriage was a blue-chip stock, a AAA-rated bond. Safe, stable, unshakable. At least, that's what the prospectus I had written in my own mind said. My name is Ethan Carter. I am 38 years old, and my life is a series of spreadsheets. As a financial consultant, I trade in certainty. I build portfolios designed to withstand chaos. I analyze risk, forecast futures, and chart paths through the volatile markets of other people's lives. My own life, I believed, was my masterpiece of risk management. The house in the suburbs with its manicured lawn and two-car garage was our tangible asset. The shared laughter, the annual trips to the coast, the inside jokes that erupted at a single glance across a crowded room. That was our accrued interest, the dividends of a decade-long partnership. Samantha was the variable I had happily factored into my orderly existence. At 35, she was a creature of light and movement, a yoga enthusiast and part-time lifestyle blogger whose talent was to curate beauty from the mundane. Her Instagram feed was a portfolio of our perfect life, sun-drenched mornings with artisanal coffee, candid shots of laughter on a windswept beach, the cozy intimacy of our home rendered in warm, Valencia-filtered hues. She was the spark, the unquantifiable asset that gave the entire enterprise its value. When we met, I was a man who lived in the predictable comfort of black and white. She painted my world in color. She planned the spontaneous road trips that terrified my inner scheduler. She dragged me to fusion restaurants where I couldn't pronounce the menu items. She taught me that life wasn't a balance sheet to be reconciled, but a landscape to be explored. I loved her for it. I loved the way she disrupted my equilibrium. For 9 years and 11 months, our investment performed flawlessly. We were the couple friends pointed to as proof that it could work. We hosted dinner parties where the wine flowed as freely as the conversation. We navigated the minor corrections, disagreements over finances, family drama, the quiet erosion of time, with the steady hand of seasoned investors. We were in it for the long haul. But the market is a fickle beast. Sometimes, the fundamentals shift so gradually you don't notice until the crash is already upon you. For us, the shift began with a whisper, a name that would eventually become the harbinger of our collapse. Jake. It started subtly, a minor entry in the daily ledger of our lives. Samantha's passion for yoga had always been a constant, a healthy and admirable part of her routine. But this new obsession with the gym, with fitness, felt different. It was more aggressive, more demanding. Jake says I need to focus on building core strength, she'd announce, her voice breathless after a living room session on her mat. He says my form has been all wrong. Jake. The name was just a data point, insignificant on its own. I filed it away under gym instructor, next to grocery store cashier and favorite barista. I was supportive, of course. I applauded her dedication. A happy, healthy wife was a positive indicator, a sign of a robust and thriving portfolio. But the frequency of the data point increased. Jake's name began to colonize our conversations. He wasn't just an instructor. He was an oracle. His pronouncements on protein powders, stretching techniques, and the optimal heart rate for fat burning became gospel. Our evenings, once a shared space for conversation and connection, were now punctuated by the thud of her gym bag hitting the floor and a weary sigh. I'm just so tired, she'd murmur, collapsing onto the sofa. Jake really pushed us hard today. I would nod, a carefully constructed smile on my face, while a quiet alarm began to sound in the back of my mind. A risk I hadn't accounted for was emerging on the horizon. The woman who once looked at me as if I were her entire world now seemed to be gazing at a distant shore, one where I couldn't follow. The light in her eyes, the energy that had once been directed at us, was now being reinvested elsewhere. And I, the meticulous planner, the expert in risk assessment, made the most foolish mistake an investor can make. I ignored the warning signs. I held my position, telling myself that all markets self-correct, that this was just a temporary dip. Because when you've invested 10 years of your life into something, you don't pull out at the first sign of trouble. You double down. You tell yourself it's unshakable. You hold on, even as you feel the ground crumbling beneath your feet. The first few times Samantha mentioned Jake's name, it registered as nothing more than ambient noise. It was a data point without context, an unclassified entry in the sprawling spreadsheet of our shared life. I was pleased for her. Truly, a new passion was a good thing. It indicated personal growth, a positive market trend in the economy of her happiness. One Tuesday evening, I came home to find her on the living room floor, contorting her body around a foam roller with a look of intense concentration. The scent of lavender and sweat hung in the air. "Tough day?" I asked, loosening my tie and setting my briefcase by the door, a ritual so ingrained it felt like a part of my anatomy. "Tough in a good way," she grunted, rolling over a knot in her calf. Her face was flushed, her hair pulled back in a messy bun from which stray strands had escaped to frame her face. She looked vibrant, alive. "Jake says this is non-negotiable for muscle recovery. He says most people neglect their fascia, and that's where injuries start." "Fascia," I repeated, the word foreign on my tongue. I walked to the kitchen and pulled a bottle of water from the fridge. The cool plastic felt good against my palm. "Right." From the kitchen doorway, I watched her. She moved with a new kind of purpose, a seriousness that hadn't been there before. Her old yoga practice was about flow, about mindfulness, about connecting with her own breath. This was about optimization. It was aggressive, a war waged on her own body in the name of improvement. "He's really knowledgeable," she continued, her voice slightly strained as she shifted her weight. "He explained the whole kinetic chain to me today, how weakness in the ankles can lead to hip pain. It's fascinating. It's like he sees the body as this interconnected machine." "Sounds like it," I said, leaning against the counter. I felt a familiar role settling over me, the supportive husband, nodding along to a monologue about a world I didn't inhabit. It was no different than when she'd been obsessed with sourdough starters for 3 months, filling our kitchen with jars of bubbling yeast, or the 6 months she dedicated to French New Wave cinema, forcing me to watch black and white films with inscrutable plots. I was the stable shoreline to her adventurous tides. My role was to provide the anchor. But this felt different, somehow. The enthusiasm wasn't directed at the activity itself, but seemed to flow from an external source. It wasn't, I learned this today. It was, Jake says this. He was the authority, the guru, the validating voice that echoed in our home long after she'd left the gym. I dismissed the thought as uncharitable, a flicker of something possessive and ugly I didn't want to examine too closely. I was a numbers guy, not a fitness expert. Who was I to question the methods of a professional? My role was to cheer from the sidelines, to praise the dedication, to admire the results. And the results were undeniable. She was leaner, stronger, radiating a new kind of vitality that made heads turn when we walked into a room. I told myself I should be proud. That night in bed, she was asleep before her head hit the pillow, a deep, exhausted slumber born of physical exertion. I lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, the faint moonlight striping the walls. I listened to her steady breathing, a rhythm that had been the soundtrack to my nights for a decade. It was the sound of safety, of stability. I reached out, my fingers hovering just above her shoulder, wanting to feel the familiar warmth of her skin but not wanting to disturb her. A new, minor variable had been introduced into our carefully balanced equation. It was nothing to worry about, just a single data point. It's what you do with the data that matters. And for now, all the data suggested I should just keep holding. In finance, a single data point is an anomaly. A recurring data point is a trend. Over the next few weeks, Jake's name transformed from an anomaly into a dominant market trend in our household. The refrain of "Jake says" became the soundtrack to our evenings, a constant, low-frequency hum beneath the surface of our life. Jake says I should cut out dairy. He thinks I have an intolerance that's causing inflammation. He can tell just by looking at my skin. Our refrigerator, once home to artisanal cheeses we'd discovered together, was now stocked with almond milk and soy-based alternatives that tasted faintly of cardboard. Jake recommended this new brand of leggings. The compression is supposed to be amazing for circulation during high-intensity intervals. Packages began arriving almost daily, sleek black boxes containing vibrant, skin-tight fabrics that seemed more suited for a fashion shoot than a workout. Jake's hosting a special weekend boot camp. It's expensive, but he says it will be transformative. It's a full mind-body reset. Asterisk the cost was equivalent to a weekend getaway for the two of us, a fact I noted silently, but didn't voice. His name was an invisible third presence at our dinner table, a ghost in our living room. I started to picture him, some generic, hyper-masculine trainer with a clipboard, a whistle, and veins popping from his neck. A caricature. It was easier to resent a caricature than a real person. Resenting a caricature felt petty. Resenting a man felt like admitting there was a reason to be threatened. My chance to put a face to the name came on a Thursday night. I was working late on a client's retirement portfolio, trying to rebalance their assets after a volatile week. The numbers were blurring on the screen, a meaningless dance of digits, when my phone buzzed. It was a video link from Samantha, with the message, asterisk look at this. This is the routine that's killing me. Asterisk followed by a string of laughing and sweating emojis. With a sense of weary curiosity, I clicked the link. The video opened to a brightly lit gym studio, all mirrors and polished chrome. A man stood in the center of the frame, talking to the camera with an easy, confident charm. He was tall, with sun-bleached, artfully messy hair that fell casually across his forehead and a smile that seemed both genuine and meticulously practiced. He was fit, certainly, but it wasn't the bulky, intimidating physique of a bodybuilder. It was a lean, athletic build, the kind that spoke of agility and controlled power. This was Jake. He was not a caricature. "All right, team," he said into the camera, his voice a smooth, encouraging baritone that felt instantly familiar. "Today we're focusing on explosive power. Remember, it's not about how much you lift, it's about how you move. Control the eccentric, explode through the concentric. Mind-muscle connection is everything." He then demonstrated a set of kettlebell swings with a fluid, effortless grace that was almost hypnotic. He wasn't just a trainer. He was a performer. He moved with the unearned certainty of a man who has never been told no in his life. A man who knows people are watching and enjoys the attention. He was the kind of man who didn't just occupy a room. He owned it. I watched the entire 5-minute video, then watched it again. I noted the way he spoke, the casual confidence, the way he made a complex movement look simple. I understood the appeal. He wasn't just selling fitness. He was selling a lifestyle. He was selling capability, a version of yourself that was stronger, better, more dynamic. He was selling the idea that you, too, could be like him. "Seems like a good trainer," I texted back, my fingers feeling heavy on the keys. It was a lie of omission. He seemed like a dangerously effective salesman. Her reply was instantaneous, a testament to the fact that her phone was, as always, in her hand. Asterisk, he's the best. You have no idea. He just gets it. Asterisk. A cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. He just gets it. The implication hung in the digital air between us, a toxic, unerasable cloud. Gets what? Fitness? Or something more? Gets her? In a way she felt I no longer did. I closed the laptop, the client's portfolio forgotten. That night, I updated my internal risk assessment. Jake was no longer an unclassified entry. He was a speculative, high-risk asset that was beginning to exert a significant gravitational pull on the most valuable holding in my portfolio. And I, the expert risk manager, had no strategy in place to hedge against it. An asset's value isn't just on the balance sheet, it's in its behavior. In the months that followed, Samantha's behavior began to show concerning deviations from her established patterns. The portfolio I thought I knew was being reallocated right before my eyes, and I was merely a passive observer. The first and most visible change was her wardrobe. Her drawers, once filled with the soft, muted tones of cotton and linen yoga wear, were slowly replaced by a brighter, tighter, more revealing arsenal. Leggings in electric blues and neon pinks that hugged every curve. Crop tops that showcased the newly defined muscles of her midsection. She'd stand before the full-length mirror in our bedroom, turning this way and that, assessing her reflection with a critical eye I hadn't seen before. These weren't clothes for a solitary journey of self-improvement. They were costumes for a performance, and I was beginning to suspect I wasn't the intended audience. Then there was the gym itself. It was no longer a place she went. It was a place she escaped to. Her sessions grew longer, creeping later and later into the evenings. Our shared rituals, cooking dinner together, settling on the couch to discuss our days, the simple act of existing in the same space, were systematically sacrificed at the altar of one last set or a cool-down session that ran long. Weekends, once our protected territory for lazy brunches, trips to the coast, or tackling house projects, were now booked solid with boot camps and special workshops, all invariably led by Jake. "You're going to the gym again?" I asked one Saturday morning, watching her pack a gym bag with a sense of weary resignation. Sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It was a perfect day for a drive. She didn't look up from meticulously folding a towel. Her movements were sharp, efficient. "It's a special endurance seminar, Ethan. Jake's only doing it once this quarter. It's an incredible opportunity. It's too good to miss." "What about us?" I ventured, my voice softer than I intended. The question felt weak, needy. "We were supposed to go to the farmer's market, remember? Get those heirloom tomatoes you love." She finally looked at me, her brow furrowed in a flicker of annoyance. "We can go next week. The tomatoes will still be there." "Ethan, this is important to me. Isn't it a good thing that I'm so committed to my health?" It was a masterful deflection, a classic bit of corporate spin. By framing it as a question of her commitment to a positive goal, she painted my objection as unsupportive, even petty. To argue further would be to position myself as an obstacle to her self-improvement. I was the nagging liability holding back her growth stock. I let it drop, the unspoken words turning to lead in my stomach. "Okay," I said. "Have a good workout." The most glaring red flag, the one that blinked with an almost painful intensity, was the phone. It had become a fortress, a locked black box of secrets attached to her hand. She angled the screen away from me whenever I entered a room. Notifications were swiped away with a lightning-fast flick of her thumb. And then there was the smile. A low, private smile would touch her lips as she scrolled through messages, a smile that wasn't for me, a smile that belonged to a world I was not privy to. One evening, we were sitting on the couch in a rare moment of shared quiet. A documentary about deep-sea life played on the television, the narrator's voice a soothing drone. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table, a sharp, intrusive sound. She glanced down, and that secret smile bloomed on her face for a split second before she caught herself, schooling her features into neutrality and flipping the phone face down. My heart gave a painful thud. "Who was that?" I asked, aiming for a tone of casual curiosity that I was far from feeling. "Just Rachel from the gym," she said, her eyes fixed on a bioluminescent jellyfish floating across the screen. "Organizing a group class for tomorrow." The lie was too smooth, too quick. It was a well-rehearsed line from a script I was just now realizing existed. I didn't call her on it. What could I say? "Let me see your phone." I wasn't that man. I was the man who trusted, the man who believed in the fundamentals of our decade-long partnership. But my belief was eroding, being chipped away by 1,000 tiny, suspicious acts. I felt like an auditor who keeps finding small, unexplainable discrepancies in the books. A few dollars missing here, an unsigned receipt there, a log entry that doesn't quite add up. On their own, they are nothing. But together, they tell a story. They point to a deeper, systemic fraud. The asset I had invested my entire life in was behaving erratically, and the prospectus, the story of our perfect, unshakable life, was beginning to look like a work of fiction. My brother, Nathan, was my opposite in almost every way. Where I was structured, he was spontaneous. Where I analyzed, he felt. He was a high school history teacher, married to his college sweetheart, Sarah, with 2 kids who seemed to operate on pure, chaotic energy. His life wasn't a spreadsheet. It was a vibrant, messy, beautiful finger painting. He was also the only person I could talk to without a filter. We met for our monthly beer at a noisy, dimly lit pub that smelled of stale hops and fried food. It was our tradition, a standing appointment in our otherwise divergent lives. "You look like hell, Ethan," he said, taking a long drink from his pint. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "Client giving you trouble?" I swirled the amber liquid in my glass. "Something like that." I told him everything. I tried to keep my voice even, analytical, presenting the facts as I saw them. The increased gym time, the constant quoting of Jake, the secrecy with her phone. I laid out the data points as if I were presenting a case study to a client. Nathan listened patiently, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, he was silent for a long moment, staring into his beer as if the answers were at the bottom of the glass. "So, what does your gut say?" he finally asked. The question threw me. I was used to dealing in facts, in evidence. My gut was an unreliable narrator. My gut says something is wrong. My head says I'm being a paranoid, jealous husband. Nathan shook his head, a wry smile on his face. "Your problem, big brother, is that you've spent your whole life trying to turn feelings into numbers. You can't put love on a balance sheet, and you can't quantify betrayal. Sometimes you just know." He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "And from what you're telling me, you know, you just don't want to admit it. So what do I do? Confront her? Accuse her? I have no proof, Nate. Just a pattern of concerning behavior." "What do you want to happen?" he asked, another simple question that felt impossibly complex. "I want my wife back," I said, the words raw and honest. "I want to go back a year before this. Jake person, before the gym became her religion." "You can't go back, Ethan," Nathan said gently. "The market's already shifted. You can either sell your shares and cut your losses, or you can confront the CEO and find out if the company is rotten to the core." He took another sip of his beer. "Either way, sitting around and hoping the stock price goes back up on its own isn't a strategy. It's a fantasy." His words, cloaked in my own language, hit their mark. I had been paralyzed by analysis, stuck in a loop of observation and suspicion without action. I was treating my marriage like a stock I was emotionally attached to, unable to sell even as it plummeted in value. As I drove home that night, the pub's noise replaced by the quiet hum of my engine, Nathan's words echoed in my head. Asterisk, you just don't want to admit it. Asterisk, he was right. I had been auditing the books for months, circling every discrepancy in red ink, but I had refused to write the final report. I was afraid of what it would say. I was afraid to declare bankruptcy. The dinner party was Samantha's idea. "We haven't had anyone over in ages," she'd said, a flash of her old, effervescent self returning. "Let's have Tom and Lisa over. And maybe Rachel and Greg. It'll be fun." I agreed, hoping it might be a course correction, a return to the familiar rhythms of our shared life. For a few days, it felt like it might be. We planned the menu together. We shopped for ingredients. It was a fleeting, nostalgic echo of our past. I allowed myself a flicker of hope. Maybe the trend was reversing. The evening started well. Wine flowed. Laughter filled our open-plan living space. I stood at the grill on the back patio, flipping steaks, the familiar scent of charcoal and sizzling fat a comforting balm. Tom, my best friend since college, stood beside me, a beer in his hand. Tom was a lawyer, sharp and cynical, with a loyalty so fierce it was almost intimidating. "So," Tom said, his voice a low conspiratorial rumble, "I gotta ask, who the hell is this Jake guy? Lisa says Samantha talks about him nonstop." My hand tightened on the tongs. The question, so casually delivered, felt like a public accusation. "He's her trainer," I said, my voice tight. "She's just really into fitness right now." Tom took a long swallow of his beer, his eyes appraising me over the rim of the bottle. "Right. Fitness. Is that what they're calling it these days?" He nudged me with his elbow. "Seriously, man. You okay? You seem wound tight." "I'm fine," I lied. Inside, the conversation had also, inevitably, turned to Jake. As I brought the steaks in, I walked into the middle of it. Rachel, one of Samantha's friends from the gym, a bubbly and relentlessly positive woman, was holding court. "And Jake's philosophy is that you have to shock the system. He says routine is the enemy of progress," she was explaining to a captivated Lisa. Samantha, seated on the arm of the sofa, beamed. "He's incredible. He's completely transformed my approach to wellness." I placed the platter of steaks on the dining table, the clatter of the ceramic louder than I intended. All eyes turned to me. "Well," Tom said, striding in from the patio and clapping me on the shoulder, "the man of the house has provided the protein. I'm sure Jake would approve." The joke landed in the middle of the room and died. The silence was thick, awkward. Samantha shot Tom a look of pure venom, which he met with a blandly innocent smile. Rachel, oblivious to the undercurrents, turned to me. "You should come to one of his classes sometime, Ethan. He's so motivating. I bet you'd love it." "I'm sure he is," I said, forcing a smile that felt like a grimace. "But I think I get enough motivation from Samantha." The words were meant to be supportive, a husbandly platitude. But they came out sounding hollow, sarcastic. Samantha's face tightened. She stood up, her movements jerky. "Who needs another glass of wine?" she asked, her voice a little too bright. The rest of the evening was a masterclass in tension. Samantha and I moved around each other like two opposing magnets, creating a field of palpable discomfort. Our friends, caught in the middle, resorted to safe, bland topics. Work, weather, the latest streaming series. The easy camaraderie that had always defined our gatherings was gone, replaced by a strained, painful politeness. As we cleaned up after everyone had left, the silence in the kitchen was deafening. Every clink of a plate, every splash of water felt amplified. I wanted to say something, to break the tension, to address the giant, unacknowledged chasm that had opened up between us. But what could I say? "Our friends think you're having an affair with your personal trainer." Samantha spoke first, her back to me as she loaded the dishwasher. "Tom was out of line tonight. He was making a joke, Sam," I said wearily. "It wasn't funny," she snapped, slamming the dishwasher door shut. "He was being an ass. And you just stood there and let him. What was I supposed to do?" "He was just repeating what everyone is thinking." The words were out before I could stop them. She whirled around, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and hurt. "And what is that, Ethan? What is everyone supposedly thinking?" Here it was, the moment of truth. The confrontation I had both dreaded and craved. I took a deep breath. "They're thinking you're obsessed with him. They're thinking you spend more time with him than with your own husband. They're thinking there's something going on." Her jaw tightened. "And what do you think?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. I looked at her, at the woman I had loved for a decade, and for the first time, I felt like I was looking at a stranger. "I think," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "that I don't know what to think anymore." She didn't deny it. She didn't reassure me. She just held my gaze for a long, cold moment, then turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone in the wreckage of our dinner party. The audit had gone public, and the findings were damning. The night after the dinner party was a tundra of silence. We slept in the same bed, our bodies separated by a chasm of unspoken accusations. I lay on my side, facing the window, my back a rigid wall. Samantha lay on hers, equally still. The air was thick with what hadn't been said. It was the most profound loneliness I had ever experienced, the exquisite agony of being a stranger to the person lying inches away from you. The following week, I decided I couldn't live in the ambiguity any longer. I had to try, one last time, to reconcile the accounts through direct communication. Nathan's words about confronting the CO echoed in my mind. It was time to call an emergency board meeting. I waited until a Tuesday evening, a night she didn't have a class scheduled. I made dinner, her favorite pasta with pesto and sun-dried tomatoes, a dish I hadn't made in years. I opened a bottle of the good Chianti we'd been saving. I was setting the stage for a peace talk, a negotiation. She walked in from work, saw the table set, and her guard immediately went up. "What's all this?" she asked, her tone wary as she dropped her keys on the counter. "I thought we could have a nice dinner," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Just us. Talk. Talk about what?" she asked, not moving from the entrance to the kitchen. "About us, Sam," I said, my attempt at lightness failing. "About everything." She sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated weariness. She ran a hand through her hair. "Ethan, I'm really tired. Can we not do this tonight?" "No," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "We can't not do this. It's all we ever do. We don't talk. We don't connect. We just coexist around your gym schedule." Reluctantly, she sat down at the table. I served the pasta, the silence stretching between us. I watched her push the food around her plate, taking small, joyless bites. "I feel like I'm losing you," I began, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "I feel like this fitness thing, this Jake thing, has become more important to you than our marriage." She put her fork down with a clatter. "Oh my God, are we back to this? I cannot believe you are still fixated on Jake." "I'm fixated on the fact that my wife seems to have a more intimate relationship with her trainer than she does with me." The words burst out, louder and more accusatory than I'd intended. "A more intimate relationship," she scoffed, her eyes flashing with indignation. "He's my trainer, Ethan. He helps me with my physical goals. That is his job. Do you hear how you sound? You sound jealous and possessive. Is it his job to text you at all hours of the night? Is it his job to be the first person you talk to in the morning and the last person you talk to at night?" Her face flushed a deep, blotchy red. You've been spying on me? I haven't had to spy. You're not subtle, Samantha. The phone is practically glued to your hand. You smile at it more than you smile at me. That is not true. It is true, and you know it. You know what this is about? She said, leaning forward, her voice dropping to a low, cutting tone. This is about you. You're insecure. You're feeling left behind because I'm finally doing something for myself, something that makes me feel strong and confident. And you can't handle it. You want the old, comfortable Samantha who planned her life around you. The accusation hit me like a physical blow. She had taken my genuine pain and masterfully reframed it as a flaw in my own character. I was no longer the betrayed husband. I was the insecure, controlling man holding back his newly empowered wife. It was a brilliant, devastating piece of psychological warfare. That's not fair, Sam, I said, my voice hoarse. That's not what this is about. I have always supported you. I loved it when you found new passions. This is different. This feels secretive, dishonest. Because you're making it dishonest, she shot back, standing up from the table. The chair scraped harshly against the hardwood floor. You're looking for something that isn't there, so you're inventing it in your head. You want there to be a problem, so you're creating one. So the late nights are in my head. The constant texting is in my head. The fact that you barely look at me anymore, that's in my head. I can't do this, she said, shaking her head as she backed away from the table. She grabbed her keys from the counter. I can't sit here and be psychoanalyzed by my own husband. I'm going for a drive. A drive? Or are you going to the gym? Are you going to see him? The question was poison, and I knew it as soon as it left my lips. She stopped at the door and turned, her face a mask of cold fury. You know what, Ethan? Maybe I will. At least he listens to me. At least he sees me as a person, not just a problem to be solved. The door slammed behind her, the sound echoing in the oppressive silence of the room. I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the 2 plates of uneaten pasta, the expensive wine untouched. The board meeting had been a catastrophe. The CEO had not only denied the fraud, but had accused the auditor of malpractice. The company wasn't just rotten, it was hostile. And I was left holding a portfolio of worthless stock, the truth more distant than ever. The week following our failed summit was a new kind of hell. The silence in our house was no longer passive. It was an active, malevolent force. We were 2 ghosts haunting the same space, moving through rooms without acknowledgement. Our conversations reduced to the barest logistical necessities. I'm working late tonight. There's leftover chicken in the fridge. The lawn needs mowing. Samantha doubled down on her gym routine. It was no longer just a passion. It was a sanctuary, a place of refuge from the cold war we were waging at home. Her absences became longer, more frequent. She was punishing me, using the very thing that was tearing us apart as her weapon. Every late-night return was a silent statement. See? You pushed me away. You did this. My work, once my own sanctuary of order and logic, became a place of torment. I would sit in my office, staring at complex financial models, but my mind would be elsewhere. I was running risk assessments on my own life, playing out endless scenarios, each one more painful than the last. I was sleeping poorly, eating sporadically. The confident, analytical man my clients relied on was a hollow shell. My own emotional ledger was so deeply in the red that I felt a sense of impending bankruptcy. Tom noticed. We met for a quick lunch at a sandwich shop near my office. He took one look at my gaunt face and the dark circles under my eyes and dispensed with the pleasantries. You look like you've aged 5 years in 2 weeks, he said, unwrapping his sandwich. What happened after the dinner party? I recounted the disastrous attempt at a conversation, Samantha's accusations of me being controlling and insecure, her storming out. Tom chewed thoughtfully, his legal mind dissecting the situation. Classic gaslighting, my friend. It's a textbook defense. When you can't defend the facts, you attack the person presenting them. She's turned it around to make you the bad guy, so she doesn't have to answer for her own behavior. I know, I said, pushing a piece of lettuce around my plate. But knowing it and feeling it are 2 different things. Part of me keeps wondering, what if she's right? What if I am just being a jealous idiot? No, Tom said firmly, pointing his half-eaten sandwich at me. Stop that. Do not let her get in your head. Your feelings are valid. You observed a pattern of behavior that any reasonable person would find suspicious. You tried to address it. She responded with deflection and accusation. The problem isn't you, Ethan. The problem is that she's hiding something, and she's angry that you're getting close to figuring it out. His certainty was a life raft in my sea of doubt. So what's my next move? I can't live like this, Tom. It's killing me. Legally, he said, shifting into lawyer mode. You don't have much. Suspicion isn't grounds for anything. You need facts. You need evidence. He paused, his expression softening. Personally, you need to decide what your line in the sand is. What's the one thing that, if you found out it were true, would be the point of no return? The question hung in the air between us. I knew the answer instantly. It was the one possibility so monstrous I had refused to even let myself fully contemplate it. Her sleeping with him, I said, the words tasting like poison. There you go, Tom said, his voice gentle. That's your line. Now you have to decide if you're brave enough to find out if she's crossed it. The conversation clarified my thinking. The time for hoping, for talking, for waiting, was over. The ambiguity was the true torture. I had to know the truth, no matter how damaging, no matter how much it hurt. I had to see the final, unaudited account for myself. The risk of not knowing had finally become greater than the risk of finding out. The decision to actively seek out the truth felt like a betrayal in itself. It was a violation of the fundamental principle of our marriage, trust. But that principle had already been violated, not by me, but by the months of secrecy and deflection. I was merely acknowledging the breach. My first step was small, almost shamefully so. I logged into our shared phone account online. I wasn't looking for call logs. I was looking at data usage. It was a cold, impersonal metric, but it could tell a story. I pulled up the records for the past 3 months. The trend was stark. Samantha's data usage had nearly tripled. Late at night, when she was supposedly at the gym or asleep next to me, there were consistent spikes of activity, long sessions of texting and data transfer that lasted for hours. It wasn't proof of an affair, but it was proof of a secret life, a vibrant, active world that existed entirely on her phone, a world I was locked out of. The next step felt even more sordid. I remembered Rachel, the gym friend, and her bubbly, talkative nature. She liked me. She seemed to be one of the few people in their circle who didn't treat me with suspicion. On a whim, I decided to call her. Ethan. Hi. She answered, her voice as cheerful as ever. How are you doing? I'm okay, Rachel. Listen, I have a kind of weird question, and I hope you don't mind me asking. Of course, shoot. I took a deep breath. This whole thing with Samantha and Jake. I'm just trying to understand it. You see them at the gym all the time. What are they like? Together? There was a pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought I had made a huge mistake, that she would tell me off for dragging her into our marital problems. When she finally spoke, her voice was hesitant, cautious. Well, they're close, she said, drawing out the word. He definitely gives her a lot of personal attention. Personal attention? I prompted, my heart starting to pound. Yeah, I mean, he's a good trainer for everyone. But with Sam, it's different. He's always touching her. You know, to correct her form. A hand on her back that lingers a little too long. He'll lean in and whisper something in her ear. They have little inside jokes. A lot of the girls have noticed it. She paused again. Honestly, Ethan, if I didn't know she was married to you, I would assume they were a couple. The confirmation was a gut punch. It wasn't in my head. Other people saw it too. My suspicions weren't the product of jealousy. They were the product of observation. Does he have a reputation for this? I asked, my voice strained. Another hesitation. Look, Ethan, I don't want to cause trouble. Rachel, please. I just need to know. She sighed. Okay. Yes. There have been whispers about him getting too close to some of his clients, especially the married ones. A few women have left the gym because of it. No one's ever made a formal complaint because he's so popular and charismatic, and no one wants to be that girl. But yeah, he has a reputation. I thanked her and ended the call, my mind reeling. This wasn't just about a moment of weakness or a simple flirtation. This was a pattern. Jake was a predator, a man who used his position of authority and charm to target vulnerable women. And Samantha, my wife, had walked right into his web. Whether she was a willing participant or a naive victim, I didn't know. But it was clear that the situation was far more dangerous and deliberate than I had ever imagined. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture of calculated deceit. The late nights, the secret texts, the defensive anger, it all made sense now. The time for passive intelligence gathering was over. I had to see it for myself. I had to get concrete, undeniable proof. The line in the sand Tom had talked about was looming, and I had to know, once and for all, if it had been crossed. The day I decided to go to the gym was one of the longest of my life. I went to work, sat through meetings, and spoke with clients, all while a cold, heavy dread pooled in my stomach. I was an automaton, performing the functions of my life while my inner world was on the brink of collapse. That evening, the familiar ritual began. Samantha came home, her gym bag already packed. "I'm heading out," she said, her voice breezy, avoiding my eyes. "It's a late private session with Jake. Don't wait up." It was the same lie she's told a dozen times before, the same script. But tonight, the words sounded different. They sounded like a challenge. The casual dismissiveness, the implicit instruction for me to stay home and be the good, oblivious husband, it ignited a spark of cold fury in my chest. "Okay," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. "Drive safe." She gave me a quick, distracted glance, and then she was gone, the front door clicking shut behind her. The silence she left in her wake was absolute. I sat on the couch for exactly 15 minutes, my heart pounding a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The margin call. The moment where you either put up more capital, more trust, more denial, or you accept the loss and liquidate the position. My capital was gone. My trust was bankrupt. I stood up, my movements feeling stiff, robotic. I grabbed my keys from the bowl by the door, the metal cold and final in my hand. I walked out into the cool night air, each step feeling momentous, irreversible. I was crossing a threshold, not just out of my house, but out of the life I had known. The drive to ascend fitness was a study in controlled panic. My hands, usually so steady as they signed off on multi-million-dollar transactions, gripped the steering wheel with a tremor I couldn't suppress. Each red light was a moment of agonizing stillness, a chance for my mind to run its catastrophic projections. Asterisk, this is a mistake. You're being paranoid. You're going to find her stretching with a group class and look like a fool. Asterisk, but the algorithm of my gut, an instinct honed by years of sniffing out bad deals, was screaming that this was the final audit. The debt of my suspicion had come due. The parking lot was a concrete desert under the sterile, orange-tinged glare of the lamps. Her silver SUV was parked near the entrance, a lone beacon in the desolation. The sight of it sent a cold, sharp pang through my chest. It confirmed one thing. She was here. She hadn't lied about her location, only, I suspected, about the nature of the transaction taking place inside. I killed the engine and sat in the humming silence of my car, the quiet amplifying the frantic thrumming in my ears. I was an auditor arriving unannounced, about to inspect the books of a company I suspected of cooking them for months. Part of me, the part that still clung to the memory of our wedding vows, wanted to put the car in reverse and drive away, to live in the blissful ignorance of an unconfirmed loss. But the professional in me, the man who built his career on confronting uncomfortable truths, knew that you can't manage a risk you refuse to look at. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I stepped out of the car. The air outside was cold, biting at my exposed skin as I walked toward the glass-fronted building. The main floor was dark, the rows of treadmills and weight machines standing like silent, skeletal sentinels. A single light spilled from a frosted glass door at the end of a long hallway, a studio labeled private training. Muffled sounds emanated from within, a low murmur of voices, then a cascade of feminine laughter that was achingly, horrifyingly familiar. It was Samantha's laugh, but it was a version I hadn't heard in months. It was unguarded, joyful, intimate. It was a sound that didn't belong to me anymore. My breath caught in my throat. I moved with the stealth of a predator, my dress shoes silent on the polished concrete floor. Each step was a lifetime. I reached the door, my heart a trip hammer against my ribs, and peered through the narrow, unfrosted strip of glass at the edge of the frame. The scene inside was a tableau of betrayal, composed with an almost artistic cruelty. Samantha wasn't working out. She was perched on the edge of a weight bench, dressed in vibrant blue leggings and a matching top that seemed designed less for performance and more for presentation. Jake stood between her legs, his hands resting on the bench on either side of her hips, caging her in. He leaned in, whispering something that made her tilt her head back and laugh again. That same devastating, intimate sound. He wasn't her trainer. He was her conspirator. And then, in a movement that seemed both agonizingly slow and brutally fast, he lowered his head, and their lips met. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a fleeting, ill-advised peck. It was a kiss of deep, languid ownership. A full and complete merger. His hand moved from the bench to the small of her back, pulling her closer. Her hands came up to rest on his shoulders, her fingers tangling in the hair at the nape of his neck. For a frozen eternity, I was just a spectator. The financial consultant in my brain was clinically, coldly assessing the damage. Asterisk total loss. Catastrophic failure of asset. The portfolio is worthless. Asterisk my emotional ledger, a document I had so carefully maintained for a decade, was wiped clean, replaced by a single, glaring entry written in blood-red ink. Default. Then the cold analysis shattered, and pure, primal rage flooded the void. This wasn't a market crash. This was a hostile takeover. In my house. Of my wife. Of my life. I didn't knock. I didn't think. I acted. My hand shot out and I shoved the door open with a force born of 10 years of loyalty and a single moment of absolute annihilation. The door slammed against the interior wall with a concussive bang that echoed through the cavernous gym like a gunshot. Samantha. The word was a bark, ripped from my throat, raw and unfamiliar. They sprang apart, their movements frantic, guilty. Samantha's eyes, wide with a terror that was almost satisfying, flew to mine. Her face, flushed with pleasure moments before, was now a canvas of chalk-white shock. Ethan, what are you doing here? Jake, however, recovered with an infuriating speed. He straightened up, a smirk playing on his lips as he turned to face me. The smirk was the final confirmation. It was the look of a corporate raider who'd just successfully liquidated a competitor's prize asset and felt nothing but contempt for the wreckage. It's nothing, man, he said, his voice a casual, dismissive drawl. He gestured toward Samantha with a flick of his head, just training her lips. The audacity. It was a match thrown on a gallon of gasoline. The world narrowed to the space between me and that smug, arrogant face. Training her lips? I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I took a step into the studio, the door swinging shut behind me, sealing us in. Is that what you call this? Ethan, please, Samantha stammered, scrambling off the bench and stepping between us, a flimsy, human shield. It's not what it looks like. Not what it looks like. My voice cracked, a whip of sound that made her flinch. I glared at her, at the woman I had shared a bed with the night before, the woman who had kissed me goodbye that morning. Tell me, Samantha, what part of this scene, this exact scene, doesn't look precisely like what it is? Jake chuckled, a low, arrogant puff of air. And that was the end of reason. Before my conscious mind could veto the action, my body had already executed the command. I lunged, not at him, but past Samantha, hooking my hand into the collar of his sweat-wicking, ridiculously expensive shirt. I slammed him back against the wall of mirrors, the impact creating a spiderweb of cracks behind his head. The sight of his reflection fracturing into a dozen pieces was grimly appropriate. You think this is a joke? I snarled, my face inches from his. His smugness had finally evaporated, replaced by the wide-eyed panic of an animal that has just realized it's no longer the predator. You think you can dismantle a man's life and walk away with a smirk? Ethan, stop! Samantha screamed, clawing at my arm. Her touch felt alien, repellent. Jake's hands came up in a gesture of surrender. Hey man, easy. Let's not do something we're gonna regret. A bitter, humorless laugh escaped my lips. Regret? The time for regret was months ago, when you first decided my marriage was a game you wanted to play. My grip tightened, my knuckles white. The only thing I'll regret is not doing this sooner. With a guttural roar of pure, unadulterated pain, I drew back my right hand. For a split second, I saw it all with perfect clarity. The terrified glint in his eyes, Samantha's horrified gasp, my own reflection in the cracked mirror, a stranger with a face contorted by rage. Then my fist connected with his jaw. The sound was sickening. Not a clean movie punch thwack, but a wet, definitive crunch of bone and cartilage yielding to force. It reverberated up my arm, a shockwave of violent finality. Jake's eyes rolled back slightly, and he crumpled to the floor like a puppet whose strings had been cut, a choked cry of agony gurgling from his throat. I stood over him, my chest heaving, my hand throbbing with a pain that was a pale imitation of the agony in my soul. "Ethan!" Samantha shrieked, her voice a piercing siren of fear and fury. "What did you do?" I slowly turned to her, the red haze of rage beginning to recede, leaving behind a cold, desolate clarity. "What did I do?" I repeated, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "Don't you dare. Don't you dare lay this at my feet. This is your work, Samantha. You and him. This is the final entry in the ledger you've been cooking for months." Tears streamed down her face, but I felt nothing. No pity. No empathy. The account was closed. "How long?" I demanded, the question sharp as a shard of glass. "How long has this been going on?" She just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing, but no sound came out. Her silence was the only answer I needed. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the studio, out of the gym, and out of the life we had built. The cold night air felt like a baptism, washing away the stench of their betrayal. As I walked to my car, the broken pieces of my life scattered around me, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. There was no going back. The asset was toxic. It was time to liquidate. The drive from the gym was a blur. I don't remember the route I took, the turns I made, the traffic lights I obeyed. My mind was a maelstrom of fractured images. The look on Samantha's face, the sickening crunch of my fist against Jake's jaw, the spiderweb cracks in the mirror. When I finally came back to myself, I was parked in front of Nathan's house, the engine still running. I didn't even remember deciding to come here. My body had acted on an instinct for safety, for sanctuary. I stumbled to the front door and knocked, my knuckles aching from the punch. Nathan opened the door in his pajamas, his face etched with sleep. He took one look at me, my wild eyes, my disheveled state, the raw, scraped skin on my hand, and his sleepiness vanished, replaced by alarm. "Ethan? What the hell happened?" He pulled me inside without waiting for an answer. I collapsed onto his couch, the sturdy, comfortable sofa that had witnessed a decade of family milestones. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. A dry, racking sob escaped my throat instead. It was a sound of pure desolation. Nathan disappeared and returned with a glass of water and a bag of frozen peas from my hand. He sat next to me in the quiet, his presence a solid, unwavering anchor in my swirling chaos. He didn't push. He just waited. Finally, the story tumbled out of me in a broken, disjointed torrent. The gym. The kiss. Jake's smirk. Training her lips. The punch. I told him everything, the words spilling out like poison being lanced from a wound. When I finished, I was spent, hollowed out. I stared at the floor, at the intricate patterns on his area rug, tracing them with my eyes to keep from completely falling apart. "Okay," Nathan said, his voice calm and steady, cutting through my haze. "First things first. You're staying here tonight. You can't go back to the house." I nodded numbly. The thought of walking back into that house, into our bedroom, was unbearable. "Second," he continued, "that guy, Jake. He's going to press charges. You need to be prepared for that." "Let him," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I don't care. I know you don't care right now, but you will. We'll get you a lawyer. Tom will know someone good. We'll deal with it." He put a firm hand on my shoulder. "You're not alone in this, Ethan. You hear me." I looked at him, at my brother, and for the first time that night, I felt a flicker of something other than rage and despair. It was gratitude. The rest of the night passed in a fugue state. Nathan set me up in his spare room. I lay on the bed, fully clothed, the frozen peas slowly melting on the nightstand. Sleep was impossible. My mind was a relentless loop of the events in the studio, each replay sharper and more painful than the last. The betrayal was a living thing, a venom coursing through my veins. Sometime before dawn, my phone, which I had forgotten in my pocket, began to buzz incessantly. I pulled it out. The screen was lit up with a string of missed calls and frantic text messages from Samantha. "Ethan, please answer me. Asterisk. Where are you? Are you okay? Asterisk. We need to talk about this. It was a mistake. Asterisk. It meant nothing, I swear. Please don't do this. Asterisk. I love you. Don't throw away 10 years over this. Asterisk." I read the messages, each one a small, sharp stab. Asterisk a mistake. Asterisk it meant nothing. The lies were so transparent, so insulting. She wasn't sorry for the betrayal. She was sorry she got caught. She wasn't worried about me. She was worried about the consequences for herself. I turned the phone off and tossed it onto the floor. I couldn't deal with her. I couldn't deal with anything. All I could do was lie there in the dark, in a strange bed in my brother's house, and try to breathe as the life I had so meticulously built was systematically dismantled, piece by painful piece. The liquidation was complete. Now came the fallout. The knock on Nathan's door came 2 days later. It was loud, firm, and official. When Nathan opened it, 2 uniformed police officers stood on the porch, their expressions impassive. "We're looking for Ethan Carter," one of them said. My heart sank into my stomach. I had been expecting this, but the reality of it was still a shock. I stepped forward from the living room. "I'm Ethan Carter." The officer handed me a folded document. "You're being served with a complaint. Jake Larson has filed a report alleging assault and battery. You'll be required to appear in court on the date listed. We advise you to seek legal counsel." I took the paper, my hand trembling slightly. The formal, legal language on the page felt surreal. Asterisk assault, battery, fractured jaw, significant injury. Asterisk Jake, the man who had systematically dismantled my marriage, was now painting himself as the innocent victim, using the law as his shield. The irony was so bitter it almost made me laugh. That afternoon, I sat in a sleek, minimalist office across from Amanda Chun, a lawyer Tom had recommended. She was sharp, impeccably dressed, with a no-nonsense demeanor that radiated competence. She read the police report, her expression unreadable. "Okay," she said, setting the papers down. "Here's the situation. He's claiming you attacked him without provocation. The gym has security footage, which his lawyer has already acquired. It will show you entering the studio and striking him. From a purely legal standpoint, that's not good." I let out a bitter laugh. "Without provocation? He was kissing my wife." Amanda nodded, her pen poised over a notepad. "I understand. And that is our narrative. The context is everything here. We argue that this was not a malicious attack, but a crime of passion, a temporary loss of control brought on by extreme emotional distress. A reasonable person, in your shoes, might react similarly. So I just have to hope the judge is a reasonable person? We have to make them see it from your perspective," she said. "Your emotional state is key. But I need you to understand something, Ethan. The court is a court of law, not a court of morals. His infidelity isn't a legal defense for your assault. Our job is to mitigate the damage." The thought of having to defend my reaction, of having my pain and rage scrutinized and judged in a courtroom, was humiliating. But Amanda's calm confidence was a steadying force. "What about his history?" I asked, remembering my conversation with Rachel. "He has a reputation for this kind of thing." Amanda's eyes lit up with interest. "Tell me more." I told her about the whispers, about other women leaving the gym. "It's just hearsay, I guess. No one ever filed a complaint. Hearsay isn't admissible, but a pattern of behavior is," she said, scribbling notes. "It can be used to challenge his credibility, to paint a picture of him as a predator who provokes his victims. This is good, Ethan. This gives us an angle." While I was preparing for a legal battle, Samantha was facing a different kind of trial, the trial of public opinion. The story of what happened at the gym spread like wildfire through our social circle and beyond. Someone at the gym had leaked the story to a local gossip blog, and from there it took on a life of its own. Samantha's carefully curated online world imploded. Her Instagram, once a beacon of aspirational wellness, became a battlefield. Her last post before the incident, a picture of her in a complicated yoga pose with the caption, "Finding my balance," was flooded with scathing comments. "Finding your balance in your trainer's arms. Asterisk. Hashtag homewrecker. Asterisk. Your poor husband. This is disgusting. Asterisk. She tried to do damage control. She deleted the post and went silent for a few days before re-emerging with a vague, tearful apology video. She sat in our living room. Asterisk our asterisk living room. Her face pale and makeup free, and spoke about making terrible mistakes and losing sight of what's important. It backfired spectacularly. The video was seen as a self-serving, manipulative performance. Brands that had partnered with her quietly dropped her. Her follower count plummeted. The perfect life she had so meticulously curated online was revealed to be a fragile house of cards, and it was collapsing in real time. I watched all of this from the detached safety of Nathan's house. A dark, ugly part of me felt a grim satisfaction. It was schadenfreude, the pleasure derived from another's misfortune, and I hated myself for feeling it. But another part of me just felt sad. The woman in that video, desperate and broken, was a stranger. What had happened to the vibrant, joyful woman I had married? Had she ever really existed, or was that just another carefully curated image? The legal fallout was exhausting, the public spectacle mortifying, but it was also clarifying. The lines had been drawn. The battle was no longer just about my marriage. It was about my reputation, my future, and my own sense of justice. It was a reckoning, and I was determined to see it through. The process of disentangling a decade of a shared life is a brutal, painstaking affair. It's like trying to separate two trees that have grown together. Their roots intertwined so deeply that you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. Every document, every asset, every memory had to be sorted, divided, and severed. I filed for divorce the week after the incident at the gym. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts. The line in the sand had been crossed, washed away by a tide of betrayal. Samantha's reaction was predictable. First came the denial. "You can't be serious, Ethan. We can get through this." Then came the bargaining. "Let's go to therapy. Let's take a break. We can fix this, I know we can." Finally, when she realized I was resolute, came the anger. "You're just trying to punish me. You're throwing away 10 years because of one stupid mistake." "It wasn't one mistake, Sam," I told her over the phone, my voice flat and tired. "It was the last conversation we would have without lawyers present. It was 1,000 small ones that led to one big one. The lies, the secrecy, the disrespect. The kiss was just the final entry in a ledger you've been falsifying for months." Her silence on the other end of the line was its own confession. Amanda handled the legal proceedings with ruthless efficiency. We offered a clean split. She could keep the car, her personal belongings, and half of our liquid savings. I would keep the house, my retirement accounts, and my dignity. She initially balked, her lawyer demanding more, but Amanda made it clear we were prepared to go to court and use the circumstances of the divorce, her infidelity, the public scandal, as leverage. Samantha, her reputation already in tatters, quickly agreed to our terms. While the lawyers handled the paperwork, I began the grim task of dividing our life. I went back to the house one Saturday afternoon while she was out. The air inside was stale, heavy with the ghosts of our dead marriage. I walked through the rooms, a stranger in my own home. I started in the bedroom. I took a large cardboard box and began to fill it with her things. Her clothes, still smelling faintly of her perfume. Her books on the nightstand. The collection of framed photos on her dresser. Pictures of us smiling on vacation, at weddings, at family gatherings. Each one was a small, sharp pain, a reminder of a life that was now a lie. I packed them all away, turning the happy memories into artifacts for a museum of a failed relationship. The hardest part was the living room. It was the heart of our home, the space where we had laughed, argued, and lived. I looked at the couch where we had watched countless movies, where she had laid her head in my lap. I looked at the bookshelf filled with books we had read together, the travel guides from our trips, the photo albums documenting our shared history. I felt a wave of grief, so profound it brought me to my knees. It wasn't just grief for the woman I had lost, but for the man I had been with her. The trusting, happy man who believed in the unshakable foundation of his life. He was gone, a casualty of the wreckage. I sat on the floor for a long time, surrounded by the boxes and the silence. The anger had subsided, leaving behind a vast, hollow emptiness. This was the true cost of the liquidation. Not the money, not the house, but the complete and utter demolition of my past and my future. I eventually stood up, my knees aching. I sealed the boxes with packing tape, the sound ripping through the quiet house. I labeled each one in black marker, Samantha. I stacked them neatly by the front door, a monument to our ending. As I left the house that day, I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. The disentanglement was almost complete. All that remained was to sign the final papers and walk away from the rubble. The first court hearing for the assault charge was a surreal, out-of-body experience. I sat at the defendant's table, wearing my best suit, feeling like an imposter in my own life. Across the courtroom, Jake sat with his lawyer. His jaw was still wired shut, and he wore a neck brace, a piece of theatricality that I was sure was his lawyer's idea. He looked at me with an expression of smug victimhood that made my blood boil. Amanda had been clear in her instructions. Stay calm. Do not react. Look at the judge, not at him. Let me do the talking. Jake's lawyer painted a picture of Mai as an unhinged, violent monster who had launched an unprovoked attack on an innocent professional just doing his job. He presented the security footage, which, stripped of its emotional context, looked damning. It showed me storming into the studio, shouting, and striking a defenseless Jake. When it was Amanda's turn, she began to carefully dismantle their narrative. She didn't deny the punch. Instead, she reframed it. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and confident. "What that video does not show is the months of emotional distress my client was under. It does not show the systematic dismantling of his 10-year marriage by the plaintiff, Mr. Larson." She called her first witness, Rachel. On the stand, Rachel was nervous but resolute. Amanda skillfully guided her through her testimony. "Ms. Peterson, you were a member at Ascend Fitness. Were you familiar with Mr. Larson?" "Yes, he was a trainer there." "And were you familiar with his reputation?" Jake's lawyer shot up. "Objection. Hearsay." "Sustained," the judge said. Amanda pivoted. "Let me rephrase. Did you ever personally witness Mr. Larson behaving in a way you considered unprofessional with his clients?" "Yes," Rachel said firmly. "All the time. Especially with the married women. He was very touchy. He'd flirt. He'd send them late-night texts. It made a lot of people uncomfortable." Amanda continued, establishing a clear pattern of predatory behavior. She then called another witness, a woman who had left the gym months ago after Jake had made unwanted advances toward her. Her testimony was powerful, painting a picture of Jake not as a victim, but as a manipulator who used his position to exploit his clients. The tide in the courtroom began to turn. The judge, an older, stern-looking woman, was now looking at Jake with a new, skeptical glint in her eye. The final piece of Amanda's strategy was to put Samantha's affair on the record. It wasn't about shaming her. It was about establishing the motive for my emotional state. She submitted phone records showing the late-night communication and a sworn affidavit from me detailing the events leading up to the confrontation. By the end of the hearing, the narrative had been completely flipped. I was no longer the aggressor. I was the man who had been pushed to his breaking point by a calculated and cruel betrayal. The judge looked from me to Jake, her expression severe. "While this court does not condone violence under any circumstances," she said, her voice ringing with authority, "it also does not operate in a vacuum. The context here is significant." She reduced the charges from a felony assault to a misdemeanor disorderly conduct. I was sentenced to a fine, mandatory anger management classes, and probation. It wasn't a complete exoneration, but it was a victory. It was a legal acknowledgement of my pain, a public refutation of Jake's victim narrative. As we left the courtroom, I saw Jake arguing with his lawyer, his face red with fury. He had lost. He had tried to use the system to further humiliate me, and it had backfired. Outside on the courthouse steps, the sun felt unnaturally bright. "We did it," Amanda said, a rare smile on her face. "It's a good result, Ethan." I nodded, feeling a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying begin to lift. "Thank you, Amanda, for everything. You did the hard part," she said. "You told the truth." It wasn't over. I still had the divorce to finalize, a life to rebuild. But the reckoning was complete. I had faced my accuser and won. I had stared into the abyss of the legal system and come out the other side, bruised but not broken. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something I had thought was lost forever: hope. The final divorce decree arrived in a crisp manila envelope. The paper was heavy, official, the language cold and clinical. Asterisk irreconcilable differences. Dissolution of marriage. Asterisk a decade of love and life, reduced to a few sterile legal phrases. I signed my name on the dotted line, my signature feeling both like a death sentence and a declaration of independence. With the legal battles behind me, an unnerving quiet settled over my life. The chaos, the anger, the constant state of high alert, it was all gone, replaced by a vast, empty silence. I was living alone in the house that had once been our home. Her boxes were gone, picked up by her sister one afternoon while I was at work. But her presence lingered, a ghostly echo in every room. The first few weeks were the hardest. The loneliness was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered me in the evenings. The house was too big, too quiet. The routines I had clung to for a decade were gone. There was no one to talk to about my day, no one to share a meal with, no one to watch a movie with on the couch. My anger management classes, a condition of my probation, were surprisingly helpful. I went in expecting a room full of hardened criminals, but it was mostly just men like me, ordinary guys whose lives had pushed them past their breaking point. We sat in a circle on uncomfortable plastic chairs and talked. We talked about our anger, but more importantly, we talked about the pain underneath it. Our therapist, a calm, insightful man named Dr. Hill, gave me a piece of advice that stuck with me. Anger is a secondary emotion, Ethan. It's a shield we use to protect ourselves from what we're really feeling: hurt, fear, grief. You can't heal until you're willing to put down the shield and feel what's underneath. His words unlocked something in me. I had been so consumed by my righteous fury at Samantha and Jake that I hadn't allowed myself to truly mourn. I was grieving the loss of my wife. Yes, but it was more than that. I was grieving the loss of my future, the life I had planned, the man I thought I was. I started to put down the shield. I let myself feel the sadness. Some nights, I would sit in the dark and just cry, racking sobs for everything I had lost. It was painful, but it was also a release. I was finally auditing the true emotional cost of the betrayal. Slowly, I began to rebuild. I started with the house. It needed to be mine again, purged of the ghosts of the past. I packed away every remaining artifact of our shared life. The photos, the souvenirs, the wedding gifts we never used. I painted the walls, changing the warm, neutral tones Samantha had loved to cool, clean shades of gray and blue. I sold the living room furniture we had picked out together and bought a new couch, a sleek, modern leather one that was entirely my own. I reclaimed the spaces. The kitchen, where we had cooked together, became my laboratory. I bought cookbooks and started experimenting, finding a quiet satisfaction in the methodical process of following a recipe, of creating something delicious with my own two hands. The garage, which had become a cluttered storage space, became my workshop. I bought a set of woodworking tools and started building small things: a bookshelf, a coffee table. The act of measuring, cutting, and joining wood was a kind of therapy, a way to create order and beauty out of raw materials. I was building a new life, one piece at a time. Healing isn't a destination, it's a process. And part of that process was rediscovering the parts of myself I had let fade during my marriage. I had always been an outdoors person, but my adventures had become tamer over the years, subsumed by our comfortable, domestic life. One Saturday, on a whim, I dug my old hiking boots out of the back of the closet, packed a lunch, and drove 2 hours to a state park with a challenging mountain trail. The climb was grueling. My lungs burned, my legs ached. But as I pushed myself, step by step, up the rocky path, I felt something shifting inside me. The physical exertion was a welcome distraction, a way to silence the relentless chatter in my mind. When I finally reached the summit, I was breathless, sweat-drenched, and utterly exhausted. I stood on the rocky outcrop, looking out at the panoramic view of the rolling hills and the endless sky. A profound sense of peace washed over me. Up here, above it all, my problems felt small, manageable. The betrayal, the divorce, the court case. They were all just part of the landscape of my past, not the entirety of my world. I had climbed a mountain, both literally and figuratively. I had reached the top under my own power. That hike was a turning point. It became a new ritual. Every weekend, I would explore a new trail, pushing my physical limits, finding solace and strength in the solitude of nature. I rediscovered my love for photography, my old camera becoming a constant companion. I started seeing the world differently, noticing the small details. The way sunlight filtered through the leaves, the intricate patterns of frost on a fallen leaf, the reflection of the sky in a still mountain lake. I was learning to find beauty in the world again, on my own terms. I also reconnected with my friends, the ones I had neglected during the chaos. Tom and I started a weekly basketball game. I had dinner with Nathan and his family every Sunday. Their boisterous, loving, chaotic home was a welcome antidote to the quiet emptiness of mine. My nephew, Ryan, would show me his latest Lego creation with solemn pride. My niece, Emma, would insist I have a tea party with her and her menagerie of stuffed animals. In those simple, innocent moments, I felt a sense of belonging, a reminder that my life was still rich with love, even if it was a different kind of love than I had planned for. One day, Nathan convinced me to join him at a local community event in the park. It was a street fair with food trucks, live music, and booths selling local arts and crafts. I was hesitant at first. The thought of being in a crowd, of making small talk, was still daunting. But Nathan was persistent. "You've been a hermit for 6 months, Ethan. It's time to rejoin the human race." The park was buzzing with life. The air smelled of grilled food and freshly cut grass. A folk band was playing on a small stage, their gentle acoustic melodies drifting through the crowd. I wandered through the booths, a cup of coffee in my hand, feeling a strange sense of detachment, an observer on the sidelines of other people's happiness. That's when I saw her. She was standing by a display of landscape paintings, her head tilted slightly as she studied a canvas depicting a stormy coastline. She had warm, auburn hair pulled back in a loose braid, and she was wearing a simple green dress. There was something about her, a quiet, self-contained stillness in the midst of the bustling crowd, that drew me in. I found myself walking toward her, my heart giving a nervous flutter. It was a feeling so unfamiliar I almost didn't recognize it. "Beautiful work, isn't it?" I said, my voice sounding rusty. She turned, and her eyes met mine. They were a clear, intelligent green, the color of sea glass. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. "It is," she said, her voice soft and warm. "There's something so peaceful about it, even with the storm." Her name was Hannah. She was a botanist who worked for the state. We started talking, and the conversation flowed with an ease that stunned me. We talked about the art, about the music, about our shared love for hiking and the outdoors. She told me about her work studying rare plant species. I told her about my newfound passion for woodworking. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I was having a conversation with a woman where my past wasn't a looming, unspoken presence. I was just Ethan, a man talking to Hannah, a woman, in a park on a sunny afternoon. There was no baggage, no history, no pain. It was just a connection. As the afternoon wound down, we exchanged numbers. "I'd love to see your woodworking sometime," she said. "I'd love to show you." I replied, a real, unforced smile on my face. I left the park that day feeling lighter than I had in a year. Hannah wasn't a solution to my problems. She wasn't a replacement for Samantha. She was a possibility, a reminder that life goes on, that new connections are possible, that the world is still full of good and interesting people. She was a sign that a new chapter could begin. In the months that followed, I continued to rebuild. My life found a new rhythm, one that was quieter, more deliberate, and entirely my own. The anger management classes ended, my probation was lifted, and the last vestiges of the legal battle faded into the past. I saw Hannah a few more times. We went for a hike. I showed her my workshop. We had dinner. It was easy, comfortable, and refreshingly uncomplicated. There was a spark between us, a gentle, warming ember rather than the consuming fire I had known with Samantha. I wasn't ready to dive into another serious relationship, and Hannah, who had been through her own difficult breakup years before, seemed to understand that. We were two people enjoying each other's company, taking things slow, with no expectations. It was exactly what I needed. One evening, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe the screen. "Hello, Ethan? It's Emily, Samantha's sister." Her voice was a ghost from a past life. I was silent for a moment, unsure of what to say. "What do you want, Emily?" I finally asked, my tone colder than I intended. I know you probably don't want to hear from me," she said, her voice hesitant. "But I wanted to. I don't know. Apologize, I guess, for how I acted. I was just trying to protect my sister, but I was wrong. What she did to you was awful. And I'm sorry." The apology was unexpected. "Okay," I said, not knowing what else to say. "She's not doing well, Ethan," Emily continued, a note of desperation in her voice. "She lost everything. Her friends, her career, herself. He was a predator. He did a number on her. He moved on without a second thought, and she's just broken. I listened, a strange sense of detachment washing over me. I felt a pang of pity for the woman she was describing, but it was the pity one feels for a stranger in a sad story, not the visceral pain I would have once felt. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it. But it was no longer my problem to solve, no longer my pain to carry. I hope she gets the help she needs. I ended the call, feeling a sense of finality. That part of my life was well and truly over. Samantha and Jake were figures from a closed chapter, their story continuing on a path that no longer intersected with mine. That night, I sat in my living room, in the leather armchair I had chosen, surrounded by the furniture I had built and the quiet peace I had earned. I thought about the man I was a year ago, the man whose entire sense of self was tied up in his marriage, in the life he had so carefully constructed. He was gone. In his place was someone different. Someone quieter, perhaps, but stronger. Someone who had faced the complete demolition of his world and had managed to rebuild, piece by piece, on a new, more solid foundation. The scars were still there, faint white lines on my emotional ledger. They would always be a part of me, a reminder of the cost of betrayal, the pain of loss. But they were no longer open wounds. They were just proof that I had been wounded, and I had survived. I looked around the room, at the life I was building for myself. It wasn't the life I had planned for 10 years ago. It was better. It was real. It was mine. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt a deep, quiet, unshakable sense of peace. The books were balanced. The account was settled. I was finally, truly free.